Hi, this is Richard Barrett for Guitarist magazine, welcoming you to another Blues Headlines. This month I've played a solo which has an interesting backstory. There's a period of Peter Green's career in the late 70s when he recorded an album called In the Skies, and during that period another guitar player, Snowy White, came in and helped out with some of the solo work on it. So that's what I'm going for. It's a bit of a hybrid between the two. I'll be back after the solo to talk through a little bit more about the whys and wherefores. So I hope you enjoy it and see you shortly. So, as you can hear, I've played the solo in one pass, but I'm going to be breaking it up into 4 parts of approximately 4 bars. As I was saying earlier, the premise really is to look at the style of guitar playing that is an amalgam of Peter Green and Snowy White that is heard on that album In the Skies. And it's very pentatonic. There are a few extras on top of that, but we're basically working off the pentatonic shapes. And as things go, I've tended to build by going higher as we go through the solo. Before we dive into lick 1, I'd like to explain that the tone I'm using, which we'll talk more about later, involves me using the out of phase setting in the middle. I've reversed the wiring on the neck pickup so that when I have both pickups on here, it's got that slightly pinched out of phase sound with cancellation going on the lower frequencies. Right, as I say, I'll talk more about that later. So lick 1, I've deliberately tried not to come in on beat 1 of each phrase here because I'm looking to capture that feeling. Peter Green and Snowy White will have this very relaxed feeling. They're not desperate to show you what they're all about. They're going to wait and they're going to play something that they've really considered. And so I've come in, round about beat 2. That's approximately what I've played on the first phrase of the solo. So at the beginning, I've done this slide and I see that as a fragment of shape 2 of the A minor pentatonic. So if shape 1 is there, shape 2 builds on it here. It really is a fragment, 2 notes. Okay, I could have played, and who knows why I didn't. It just sounded more relaxed and a bit more Peter Greeny or Snowy White if I do that. So that's shape 2, and then I come immediately down into shape 1. That's not really a full tone bend. It's on its way up there, and then I'll play the A there at the 5th fret. And really what I'd like to talk about in this first phrase more than anything else is the vibrato on the last note. What I've found seems to really typify that style of playing is to pre-bend up to the note. So I'm bending from D to E there, and you're doing it blind. And then the vibrato is down and back. And that seems, for some reason, I seem to be able to get that when I've done a pre-bend, but when you bend up to it, it doesn't seem to have the same effect. That might just be me. But have an experiment. It just seems to have a certain sound to it. Lick 2, I'm moving slightly up the fretboard. That's something that I suppose I'm done deliberately to demonstrate some different ways of playing up the fretboard, but also just as somebody listening to a guitar solo, whether you're a player or not, I want to hear something happening. I want to hear it building to a peak. And that might be by going down and hitting some really heavy notes at the bottom, depending on the style. But in this case, I've opted to move up and I'm back up to shape 2. So that's descending and then ascending. I'm just using the top few notes here on the top 3 strings. This is an interesting lick because there are various ways that you can articulate, and I'll bring your attention to the picking hand here. For this kind of phrase, Peter Green and Snowy White would generally, rather than using alternate picking on a phrase like that, they'll articulate it by brushing across the strings with the tip of the pick. So instead of, I'll play. Now, Gary Moore was also very influenced by Peter Green, and he really took that on to another stage, really. So if you can see, I'm brushing across. So I don't mean to overstate that because I'm not really leaning heavily on that technique in that phrase, but that is certainly where the thinking is coming from. And perhaps rather than just learning that phrase as is, the thinking behind it is, I could have played that, for instance. So I come out of that part of the phrase into a bend. Could have been up there. I'm going to a B, basically. There's the thinking behind that. And certainly having played that, I think on some subconscious level it made me realise, oh, well, I want to move up. Now you can hear I've done that down and back vibrato pre-bend. You've really got to be confident of your pitching. Good practice for that kind of thing. So what I've done here, I've used part of shape 3. So that's shape 3 of the A minor pentatonic. So that gives me a bridge to jump up. I'll pause after that and then I'm able to think about the next phrase. Lick number 3. Here I've stayed very much in one position and I would call it shape 4 of the A minor pentatonic. Now, looking back at the solo, you'll see I haven't stuck rigidly to that, and I certainly haven't used all of it. In fact, I've started with a bend. And then I've brought in the F here. And some Bs. And what I find with that is they create a little bit of tension. It's brought in some of the A natural minor scale, which is not in its natural position. This is a mode. You'll notice I'm not saying which mode because I can't remember what the name is for that mode. But so playing this, I'm visualising that A minor triad. I know I've got this shape. So I hope that goes some way to explaining the thinking behind the phrase. It's easy enough to learn note for note, but there's obviously more to it going on. It might just happen that on another day I'll play something different. We all would. Lick 4, I've deliberately gone up to the higher reaches of the fretboard. I want to create a bit of a peak here, and so I'm all the way up to shape 1 of the A minor pentatonic, but up an octave above where we began. And I'm reminded that actually for the recorded solo, I think I backed off the bridge pickup just slightly. With this out of phase stuff, you can get degrees of out of phase. That thickens things up a bit. It's quite a strange phenomenon, the out of phase. So I'm paraphrasing, don't go comparing that with the one in the solo. It's about the same. The idea is rather than going all the way up. Sure, I could play like that, but I think it's more expressive if I do that bend again where I pre-bend and the down and back vibrato. There is some handling noise. You don't hear it so much in a track, but don't beat yourself up about it too much. And of course, I'm bringing the B in again. It adds a bit of tension. I mean, it's a minor ninth over an A minor. And over the F, it's a flat 5. I'm not always thinking about it that consciously, but it just happens to be true, and it's worth knowing. Okay, and then... So it's more like your regular blues lick, but I've used that style of bends and vibrato because I just think it's such a trademark, if you'll forgive the cliche. Right, let's have a talk about the tone. I am plugged, as you may expect, into the studio's Vox AC15C1. Now, I do plug into that amp a lot, but that's not because it's all we've got available. We've got Marshalls, we've got Fenders, we've got various other things, but the Vox really does seem to be the right sound for this. Though I'll go further than that and say that you could plug into basically anything. The idea that I'm after here is a tone that's breaking up a little bit in the way that a tone will be smoother if it's compressed. If you overdrive it, then it just takes the edge off and yeah, a little bit of distortion, a little bit of breakup. I'll just play you a little bit and you'll hear. It's not a filthy sound, it's just got that breakup on. The Vox is really good for that. Sometimes I'll bring a pedal, I'll bring a super overdrive or something and drive the Vox a little bit harder and maybe focus the low end a little bit. But Peter Green and Snowy White were not known for their use of pedals particularly. And there's an anecdote that Gary Moore told about seeing Peter Green playing in Belfast, I think for the first time, where he was plugged into whatever the amp was the venue had and still sounded great. So I'm not saying it's all in the fingers and not the gear, but I am saying this is about your approach, the way you attack the string, which pickup you use, and having an amp that's just set on the edge of breakup. I'm using a bit of the reverb on the amp, but we've also added a little bit in software as well. So just to dress it up a little bit so that it sounds nice in the track. But I do emphasise that there's no secret and there's no jiggery-pokery going on. This is a very simple approach and a very simple sound. Now, I have already referred to the out-of-phase wiring, and I said I would come back to it, so here we are. I've seen Gary Moore saying that he would just use his controls up to full for the out-of-phase, and no one can argue with what a great sound he's getting from that. I've also found that using the out-of-phase pickup wiring, and I have this permanently wired like that, and obviously I use this guitar for lots of other things. I'll take it out and play shows with it, and I found that if you blend the pickups a little bit with the out-of-phase setting, there are quite a few tones that you can get. So I'll demonstrate. Everything's on 10 at the moment. And I've found that you can make the neck pickup the dominant one, and I'm just going to back this bridge pickup down to about 8, and I'm going to leave a string ringing while I do so, just so that you can hear the change in the tone. It's almost like hitting a switch, actually. So rather than... So the neck pickup is the dominant one now. By the time I'm getting down there around to about 5, it's sounding very similar to if I just used the neck pickup on its own. But something from the attack remains, so let me just try that again. There's a bit of tape on my volume control because I'm too blind to see it with my naked eyes. Right, let's try this the other way around. Leave the bridge pickup up full and just bring the neck pickup out. So you can hear that when it goes from 10 down to 9, you really hear that cancellation effect from being out of phase turns off. You can almost hear the centre frequency shift around a bit. I feel like that's moving down. And then of course it goes off. So it's quite an interesting way of doing it. That's a bit of an extra on top, because I don't think Peter Green or Gary Moore for that matter were really known for manipulating the controls a lot, but I do think it's worth putting in there. We're going to have another listen to the solo before we finish, so I hope you enjoy that and see you next time.